The Spin-Off Podcast Network. Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spin-Off. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit, so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
The Fold is brought to you by O-Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. No mai hoki mai ki The Fold, e mihi nei ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. My guest today is Bronwynn Bakker, who is one half of Kevin & Co, which has become the preeminent producer of comedy in New Zealand, TV comedy. And, you know, like they're behind shows like Creamery, which they co-produced with Flat 3, New Zealand Today, Guy Montgomery Spelling Bee, Taskmaster, which actually involved a big risk and a big bet and was kind of foundational to the company, but also narratives like Golden Boy and Double Parked, the Chris Parker, Alice Snedden written vehicle, which is coming out any day now if it's not out already when this airs. So they basically have come from a standing start, not particularly long ago, to become the home of comedy in New Zealand, particularly for that generation of comics that came out of broadly the sort of snort/basement scene. And obviously Rose Matafeo is now a global superstar, but there's a whole bunch who've come out of that who really are kind of killing it in different ways. But the actual origin story of them and Kevin & Co in a lot of ways is Jono and Ben. That's a show that honestly, like, I didn't particularly love, if I'm honest. It was probably too broad for me as a person, and I wrote reviews of it at the time that were kind of indifferent. But I think over time I've come to really appreciate what an extraordinary service it provided, and that it, for many, many years, it ran for a very long time by New Zealand comedy standards. It served an audience, and it did a job for Three, getting local comedy, like original local comedy, in front of an audience that was ultimately right at the heart of prime time. But it also provided a training ground for all those comedians so that they could ultimately go on and make their own shows, whether that was writing, starring, like it just created opportunities for them, which just aren't going to happen without that. And I talked with Bronwynn about why, which has been a theme on this show, like where is the next Jono and Ben coming from? Because it does feel like we need something like it. And equally, what birthed it? Like what went into Kevin & Co and what they've learned along the way. We talk about all that and about her amazing ambitions to basically have more complex financing for her projects, which sounds deathly boring, but when you really dig into it, it just means more money coming into this country, more opportunity, and us starting to export even more than we currently do our comedy around the world, which is honestly about as noble as an ambition as you could get out of this industry, to my mind. And we begin by talking about something which is really dear to my heart, that very special era from kind of the mid-2000s to probably the GFC, when New Zealand had branch offices of MTV and Comedy Central. And it's, there were great parties in that time, I'm not going to lie, but there was also just this sense that, of a really big, vibrant, pluralistic local media scene in a way that, that's really been kind of usurped by social media now. Not to say that whether that's good or bad, though, obviously, I kind of think it's bad. But really, you just had a very different kind of more diverse, more kind of pluralistic local media scene than the one right now, which is, it's just fundamentally a lot smaller, a lot more risk averse, and probably there are just less opportunities for the next generation of Bronwynn Bakkers to come through. So we touch on that as well at the start. But honestly, this is, I think, a really, really fun episode. It captures a whole era and looks at the, I think, underrated and probably less known role that production companies play in taking talent and ideas from performers and writers and turning those into the products that we end up consuming and loving on television. So this is Bronwynn Bakker from Kevin & Co. with a little cameo from her 5-month-old baby Harry on The Fold. Tēnā Bronwynn, and welcome to The Fold.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you having me and Harry, my little 5-month-old, here with us.
Yeah, well, this is like, as we were saying before, this is the life of a modern working media professional. Is it's everything all the time. I wondered, I was just before you came up, I remembered when we first met, and it was in a different media era for both of us and for this whole industry, and that was when you were working at, and it seems even quaint to imagine it. Like, was that a dream that New Zealand had? There were New Zealand offices for MTV and Comedy Central. Like, do you want to just tell me about what you did there and what you learned out of that particular moment in the 2000s, nearly 20 years ago now?
Oh my God! I was 25 when I first started working there. We always, Jay Reeve and I talk about. At the time, we were like, we're going to look back on these and we're going to say, these were the days, these were the fun times. This is, we got to party with all the, celebrities and all that kind of thing. And he's right. Like, we look back now and we go, we're so old and look what we got to do. So I worked there for 5 years. And it was an amazing platform for me because I got to really be thrown in the deep end. I started as a production manager and left as a supervising producer, and I got to work with MTV New York, Nickelodeon, and Comedy Central, and that's kind of when my love for comedy kind of really blossomed. But I was a 25-year-old traveling the world and working for MTV. It was amazing. Like, it was crazy. I was there with the Taylor Swift Kanye moment. We were backstage watching all the producers kind of maneuver that, and we just got to be sponges because we were doing such a small job and such a big cog, and working with Amber Peels and Jay Reeve was just a dream. So it was my first first time of kind of show running, making it up. They didn't really do much local stuff, so I got to kind of write the script for what the local show should be and what we should be doing, and really hustle to get ourselves on those red carpets and making the specials and making the half-hour shows at Rhythm and Vines, and we just got to have fun. It was really great.
Yeah, so I was working at Real Groove magazine at the time. We were just down the road, and I remember coming up to that office, and it was always a good time. Like,
yeah, it was
it felt like that was what I really associate with it, and it just kind of speaks to, it was in retrospect, and we didn't really know it at the time, but it was like the last days of a particular media era where those big multinational companies had enough money that they could open an office like this, and it felt like, I don't know if this was true, but certainly it felt like they weren't scrutinizing the books too hard. It was all like, we just have to be everywhere and own young people in a way that bleakly are owned by social companies now who have very little presence in the same way in the market. But yeah, I can imagine it being an incredible place to learn. Like, you get a lot of license and not an excessive amount of oversight, shall we say.
And that's exactly it. It was this, we were playing on the main stage, but because we weren't costing a huge amount of money, no one was really paying that much attention until we did a good job. And because we're Kiwis, we did a good job. We were such overachievers that our content was working for them. And, we did things like The Diary of Dizzy Rascal. And I think about that, I'm like, that is wild. We spent 5 days with Dizzy Rascal. And then when he came back and we did some work with him and Tiny Temper came back as well on Jono and Ben, we got access to them because of my relationship through MTV. And it was a really a formative moment in my career, I think, because it was a moment where I realised the impact of a brand. Being able to walk into a room and say, you're with MTV, was just a game changer. We got into a party at the Playboy Mansion because we showed our MTV business cards. You know, it was that kind of understanding of, okay, the power of a brand, the power of understanding what that brand means, and also showing up and doing a good job and representing what that is. And I think that was a really good learning for me, especially where I then went next to my career with Jono and Ben, was about how do you establish that brand? How do you make that something that people don't really notice into something big? You know, it was great. It was amazing.
And there's a lot of that is about consistency and repetition and knowing exactly what you are and what you aren't in some respects. Let's talk about, were you there when they turned the lights off, or had you already made that transition across?
No, I was there. 2 shows. I feel like, yeah. So MTV, yes. So we... MTV does this whole, and they're still doing it. They globalize, they localize, they globalize, they localize. And you're absolutely right. They had this office. It was great. We got to do what we wanted. And then they decided to bring that into the Australian office. So we were all there when we got made redundant. And we kind of had this moment of like, and especially for Jay and Amber, it was a huge deal because they were these big MTV presenters and traveling the world doing these amazing things. It was sad. It was really sad because we were all, but it was an end of an era. It did feel like it was the right time. It was probably the right time for me to move on anyway. So I probably would have stayed there for far too long otherwise because it was so much fun. But yeah, it was a moment of kind of like, okay. And it was also a decision. It was a crossroads in my career of, do I try and go to New York and work at MTV? And the conversations I had at that time were, I can go there as an intern. That was what was on the table.
Yeah, so it's a real reset. Or kind of go into the local industry with all that you learned and carve a different path. So how did you make that traverse? And did you seek out Jono and Ben, or was that the sort of the gig that was available?
So I did. I had worked with Rachel Jean before my time at MTV. And she, when MTV shut their doors, she was a commissioner at TV3 at the time. And she and I believe Kelly Martin had a wild idea about, they had these 2 amazing shows on air, 2 talented guys hosting these 2 shows.
This was the Jono Project, and was it Bill?
Wanna Ben at the time?
Wanna Ben,
it was
yeah,
Wanna
right.
Ben. So they had these, amazingly talented Jono Pryor and Ben Boyce doing these shows that were kind of playing in a similar space, but not really doing exactly what the network needed them to do. And I believe it was Kelly and Rachel that had the idea of putting them together. And Rachel kind of said, I know the perfect person to do that. And so she was the one that, kind of said, Bronwynn can run this show. She knows what she's doing. She can do it. And I remember that meeting with her going, pretty much don't mess it up. Like, here you go. We're taking a punt and you've got 6 weeks and we want 20 episodes. Go.
Because that's the thing. It was a volume play, and it was always that way. And that's, I think people who maybe don't work in television, I guess you can imagine, but you can't understand just how relentless that kind of a schedule is, especially to establish it right out of the gate. And it would go on to be more again. But how much of a baptism of fire was that, and how much of what it would become did you sort of know or figure out in that first year?
It's really interesting you ask that question because I feel like we pretty much stayed true to the show that we set out to make in those first 6 weeks. When we all got into a writer's room and said, what is the show we want to make and what are the influences of shows we were looking at? And we really felt, we pulled together segments from Hamish and Andy, from US talk shows that we really liked, and kind of went, okay, this is the type of thing that we could make. There's no reason, the Chasers, that kind of style stuff. And it was that first season that we really got to explore what worked and what didn't work. And it was more about kind of us finding our feet, I guess, and finding what the audience was going to respond to. And finding the roles of Jono, Ben and Guy. And I think that is one thing that I just really feel so grateful for, because I feel like it's so hard in today's market. You don't get 20 episodes to get it right. You know, we took 20 episodes to get it right. It wasn't mid-season 2 we started to rate. And the network giving us that space to actually grow a brand and grow a show, you know, 30 episodes before ratings started to happen. That would never happen in this landscape.
There's also, you were, what was the time slot initially? It was
10
late,
o'clock.
you know, the idea of a show being able to, like a funded show that had a decent enough resource, like enough that you could make it properly, happening at 10 o'clock is kind of unimaginable now. And it also allowed you to do things comedically because you're in a purely adult time slot. How important was that to sort of allowing it to be, you know, a bit more offbeat than potentially what it would ultimately be tasked with doing in the 7:30 slot that it went to?
It was crucial. The show wouldn't have become what it did had we not had that runway. If we had been put on air at 7:30 straight off the bat, or 8 o'clock, half hour, we would have had one season and we would have been done. And it's a bit like my learnings that I took from MTV. I was able, even though we were only making, you know, we were making 10 minutes of content a week at MTV, and I thought that was stressful, you know, go to making half hour and then an hour. But the learnings was the same. It was just keep just under the radar. Sorry. No. Harry's decided to contribute to the conversation.
I mean, it's an important point.
You know, at 10 o'clock, we were just under the radar enough. Like, it was... Yes, it was a good amount of money that we were being invested in. Yes, they needed it to work, but it wasn't a 7:30 show. So there were not too many eyes on it at first until it started to work. And then all eyes came on it. And then it was like, okay, how do we make this a bigger, bolder opportunity? So at 7:30 changed the game for us, but 10 o'clock, we wouldn't have got there had we not been given that runway at 10.
So in terms of the, you know, like I remember watching the show and, you know, like either writing or commissioning reviews that could be, you know, I look back on them and go, and I actually like the you know, we would write some, you know, reviews that critiqued it in ways that I don't think were, you know, with hindsight were particularly fair in terms of, you know, looking at what the show was tasked with doing, you know, and particularly because it had to rate, it had to serve what, especially by the time it moved to 7:30, which was probably the bulk of its era, it had to serve that audience, but then it had this amazing thing that it started to do, which was develop a whole generation of comics, got to, whether they were writing or performing or a mixture of both, really learn what it was like to make television it was like the Shortland Street of comedy is how I kind of conceive of it, this kind of pressure cooker environment where you've just got no choice but just to pick yourself up and do it again and again and again. What was the, you know, like when you look back on that show in that sort of primetime era, you know, how do you kind of conceive of it, and particularly that role in terms of the way it shaped that whole generation of comics in terms of their professional development?
Yeah, I think that was our goal. You know, when the shift was made to 7:30, we had an opportunity to have more money. You know, we were so we worked really hard, but we were extremely grateful for that, and we knew the responsibility that came with that. And that responsibility was to develop the market and serve the market and grow the industry. And I think you're absolutely right by saying, I've never thought about it like that, but I think you're right by saying it is like the training, you know, Shortland Street has this amazing training ground for drama, and comedy had Jono and Ben. And there's nothing like, even now, you know, like I get the opportunity to do it all again next week was so great for every single person involved, whether you're the runner, whether you're the director, whether you're the producer. You know, some weeks we nailed it, others we didn't. But the chance to actually really, you know, that Monday morning meeting where we'd all sit as a team and watch the show and openly talk about it. You know, we would ask the juniors what they thought of the episode, what was funny, what didn't work. Having the writers be able to review their scripts and be like, okay, what edits did the editors make? What was the sound mix? How did that influence? How did the music work? Like all of that content learning approach just doesn't happen on a show where you get 8.5 hours and you deliver and it goes to air 6 months later. It just doesn't. So I think that the impact of and the responsibility of that was something we took on board quite seriously. And I think it shaped shows out of that came Funny Girls and Golden Boy, and it did shape a lot of people's career, including mine. Like, it made me a better producer. And I'm so grateful to have that, because I wouldn't be able to do what I do now, if I didn't have that.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
And you look at, we'll talk about Kevin and Co. and all the shows you've made subsequently shortly, but the scale of that, you can see so many of the genesis of the talent involved, links back to that show. Before we get there, because it feels like that has been replaced in terms of the where it sits in terms of that sort of broad development piece, and obviously these things have to do two jobs, but by a bunch of sort of panel shows or shows like Taskmaster, which are similar but not quite the same and kind of crucially different. Do you think that there is still a space or a need for a show that's more like a Next Generation Jono and Ben in this era where it's, there just doesn't seem to be quite the same, perfect hothouse development atmosphere that allows for some kind of narrative skill to be developed as well as the improvisational one? I
think absolutely there needs to be a show like Jono and Ben. And I think what that gave the industry, and we're constantly, we're constantly talking to the networks and to NZ On Air about this, and every show that we make has some sort of, when we look at it and we go, okay, we're going to try and make the show, we're going to develop it, what are we going to do here? We look at what the model is in terms of, does it upskill a writer? Does it create some improvisational skills? Does it give somebody a chance on screen? And you're absolutely right. We love Taskmaster, but one of the whole reasons of wanting to make that show as Kevin and Co is because there is a gap in the market and we don't have a training ground like we did. And a show like Taskmaster, you can put a relatively unknown comedian on screen and give them 10 weeks to shine. And that was what we could do with Jono and Ben. We had the hugely talented Jono and Ben, and you could put anyone with them and give them a chance to have an hour on television, or a segment, or because you had that safety net of Jono and Ben being able to carry the show. Guy Williams is a perfect example. We're into our fourth season of New Zealand Today off the back of developing it within Jono and Ben. Funny Girls was the same. So I do think that there is space in the market for a show like that. I don't know who would make it. I don't know what it would look like in today's world, but I definitely think that there is space. And I do think there have been shows that have tried to do a similar thing, I guess, including shows we've made, but it hasn't really. We need that confidence from a network to sit back and go, we want to do something different, and that's why Alex Horn developed Taskmaster, because he was like, there's so many panel shows that don't work for me. Jono and Ben wasn't a panel show, Yeah. And I want to sort of return to that, because it is in part a product of what is a different and more difficult era for the networks. But let's talk about the era. I guess it sort of came out the back of and potentially in parallel with the end of Jono and Ben. That is when you set up Kevin and Co. What prompted you to do that, and what was the intention with it? So I joke. So Cameron obviously is the other half of Kevin and Co, who's also my husband. So Cam, his background is kind of more on the business side of, we always joke that I spend all the money and he makes all the money. And that's how our relationship works in personal and professional life. And so he was the one that actually was like, well, you're pretty much doing it anyway, because we had this little silo. We took over the church, which is a building at TV3 that was kind of became the home of comedy. 7 Days upstairs, Jono and Ben and Funny Girls and Golden Boy downstairs, and New Zealand Today. And we, when Jono and Ben got cancelled, we literally felt like, there were 60 people that had no home anymore.
Did you see the cancellation coming, just quickly as an aside?
I could feel it, and Ben could feel it, and Jono could feel it. Like, we had conversations. We always knew that we were on a good thing, but we could definitely feel it. It was the pressure and the money and the landscape had changed,
Because it had a younger demo than the likes of 7 Days, which kind of, anything young it moves faster. But
interesting enough, though, sorry to interrupt, but interesting enough, though, if we had the money to play in that kind of space now, it'd be so interesting. I remember one really amazing moment where we had the worst ratings we'd ever received. Like, it was a dire day. Like, it was like gloom and doom in the TV3 building because our ratings were terrible. It was an expensive show at 7:30, blah blah blah. But we did 1 million on YouTube that day. And I remember sitting in a meeting and the network execs basically just being like, doesn't mean anything.
It's so interesting, right? Because I remember the Jono and Ben YouTube channel has been a powerhouse. I remember when it shut down, I was like, who owns that? Because that might be the most valuable asset in New Zealand television right now. And if you'd had potentially a New Zealand on air, which I think now it would see that.
It's exactly right. That's what I mean.
And sort of going, actually, this is the perfect poster child for a digital transition.
Yeah.
But again, it's just... Perhaps it was just sort of out of time, but regardless, what happened, and you sort of, you take that the opportunity of the end of Jono and Ben and create Kevin and Co. And what was the intention? And did you see it becoming what it has?
We hoped it would become what it has, and we still are constantly trying to grow that space. And the intention was that I wanted to continue producing comedy, and Cam was like, well, you're pretty much doing it anyway, we should do our own thing. And so he really took the swing and created Kevin and Co. with myself. But it was really Cam's kind of desire to be like, there is room in the market for us. We had no shows, we had no plan in terms of, we had a plan, but we had nothing to kind of set us up. We did a thing where we paid a huge license fee to be able to pitch Taskmaster. So you have to pay a format fee as a production company to be able to go into a network and say that you've got the format and you can make the show for them.
Did that come in up front or did you record? Was it sort of contingent on you getting the green light kind of thing?
No, you have to pay the money regardless of whether you get funded or not.
Oof.
So we took a punt and we backed ourselves and we were like, this is because we needed something off the ground quickly, and we knew that there was space because Jono and Ben had gone, and we knew that a show like Taskmaster, it's a huge, yes, it's a format, but it's huge for development. Like, comedians are selling out Edinburgh shows because they appeared on New Zealand Taskmaster, and the pathways it's created for comedians off the back of doing it is huge, and I think it's it's paid off. But yeah, we took a punt. We went, we're going to pay thousands and thousands of dollars of our own no money and try and get a show off the ground that we know we can move quickly on. And I think for us, that was a really bold move, but the right move in terms of being able to go, okay, take us seriously. We're in the market to stay. And let's go. Golden Boy we produced with TV3, so that was something that had been commissioned. But that became a Kevin and Co project, which was great.
And in terms of that traverse, if you look at the book of Kevin and Co, you just have such a great relationship with that generation of New Zealand comics, and there is a good mix of the sort of panel, sort of improvisational type show and more narrative productions. How important is that relationship with that group of comedians, and how have you kind of gone about creating a space where they can come and develop ideas that kind of work in that middle ground between what they want to make and what the network will buy?
It's the most important. That showrunner relationship is the business we specialise in, because I think showrunner is still a pretty relatively new term in this market. But essentially, I was showrunning Jono and Ben. You know, I was the gatekeeper between the network and what Jono and Ben's vision for that show was. And likewise with every show we make at Kevin & Co, outside of probably Taskmaster, because we kind of showrun that, has a showrunner. So every single show we produce has a gatekeeper of that creative, and it's my job to create the right space and to put the team around them to execute their vision, and my job as a producer is to really realise that. And, you know, all of my learnings through every single show I've ever produced has given me the tools to be able to do that. I think, you know, Race by Refugees is a really good example of Pax Society having this amazing vision. And I remember just having a conversation with him about what he wanted to do. And he's just like, I've got this idea for a show. And he did the kind of conversational pitch. And I was just like, well, we must make this. You know, and that's kind of how our shows Double Parked with the same with Chris Parker and Alice Ned, and we were all chatting one day and that kind of idea came out. We actually pitched that for the sitcom for TV3 when we got Golden Boy, and we're so grateful that we didn't get it then, because I reckon we would have made such a different show then, because we weren't as we learnt so much more now. So now producing Double Parked, we knew what we were doing. We were far more confident in it than a show like Golden Boy. So yeah, it's a really crucial space for us, and I don't think any other production company, you know, they operate in different ways, but I think we specialise in that, and that the creator absolutely has a seat at the table.
But that the development time is often something which can be, you know, feels like it gets pinched, you know, in between, somehow in that kind of triangular relationship between the production company, the funder, and the network. Do you agree with that diagnosis? And or like what is something about the current way the system works, which still, for all that we are living in this digital age and for all that we've seen, you know, I'm sure that day of terrible ratings that you described would now be, you know, probably be a number 125 to 54.
Yeah, we definitely would have.
And that's, you know, people sort of fail to understand the extent to which linear ratings have created without us having yet quite figured out a way to defend the integrity of shows while making them for a different era and audience. You know, what is it about the current system which you think that, you know, could be improved upon so that you could take this generation of comics and honestly the next one, which is probably the one that really desperately deserves the opportunity, and still allow them to basically craft something that ultimately, you know, gets closest to fulfilling their vision in a way that still kind of serves the interests of the other parties involved.
Of course, yeah. So I think that the way, I think to go back a step to your first point about development, I think that's a fair comment. Like, development always gets pinched, and that is something just about being a small market. I think, you know, we don't have. You know, Kevin & Co doesn't have an initial backer, so we, for our development, we either self-fund it or rely on, you know, funding parties or networks to help out. And we're normally very particular about what we try and ask for money on versus what we pay for it ourselves and things like that. So I think that's just the relation to the development being short is just because it's a small market and there's not enough money, which is.
But I mean, I hear that, but there's part of me that thinks, you know, if you look at the overall budgets involved and the cost of development in terms of versus the cost of a production, that if, you know, New Zealand On Air or the network were able to kind of shave off a bit more and say that this part really matters, that time writing and figuring it out, you get disproportionate reward for it, and yet it still remains this thing, like everything you see is on the screen rather than in that period working out. Do you sort of agree with that thesis?
I do, and it's been something I've had lots and lots of conversations with New Zealand On Air about. And because comedy is, as you guys know, it's really tricky because it's really subjective. And so, not saying drama's easy by any means, but comedy can, network notes can be so different. Readers' notes can be so different because you're not just searching for that emotion, or you're not just searching for that murder mystery or what have you. And comedy also now needs to be hooky, it needs to be bingeable. So I think with comedy, out of all of the genres, you probably need the most development because it's got to be right, and it's far more collaborative. Like, it's not just one person off in a room writing a script by themselves. Like the writing team on something like Creamery versus the writing team on something like Double Parked is quite different. Because it's comedy, even though Creamery's comedy, it's a different style of comedy. So we've just been funded a scripted series with Jono, which is very exciting. And I was speaking to the director, David Delatour, who's going to come on board and direct that show. And we were kind of talking about scheduling and scripts and what the process is. And I kind of just said, because I have not worked with him before, and I kind of just said to him, look, the way that I like to run a show is that a script is crucial. And I think to your point, there's no point rushing production and going and filming this thing, which costs all this money, if the scripts aren't good enough. And I won't go if the scripts aren't good enough. I will beg the network. I will push, and we did that on Double Parked. We needed more time because of Alice's schedule and Chris's schedule. And the show is outstanding because the scripts are so strong. It's amazing because Chris and Alice put in that time, and I was able to create a space to give them that extra time to really work it, and they've done such a phenomenal job.
How is the power balance between creators, funders, production companies and networks now? I think historically, and whether this was accurate or not, the perception was from the networks that it was quote unquote their money. They decided what was made, and New Zealand On Air, production companies' talent's ability to sort of shop a project when there were really only two people buying was very limited. And I just wondered, as someone who's operated through the kind of that period where there was only TV and there was only the two networks to this now very different one, whether you perceive that the dynamic has changed and whether that is starting to flow and impact what is being commissioned.
I think I fundamentally don't think it's changed. I think it's still about relationships and it's still about good content. And I think that ultimately funders, networks, whoever's financing your show, whether it's an international financer or locally, they still need to know that you can deliver. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's I think that there's a lot more players in the market probably now. But at the end of the day, you still have to be able to deliver a show. And I think that relationship that that I've spent 20 years building, more than that probably, gives the funders, regardless if it's local or international, the reassurance that I'm going to be able to deliver something on time that's going to serve what they need. And on saying that as well, though, my relationship with the showrunner or the creator, they know, they trust me that I'm going to be able to meet the network's objectives, the funders' objectives, as well as what they want, So their vision, there'll be compromises. Of course there will be. The funders get a say, of course, and that's regardless of whether you're in New Zealand or internationally. But it's about my job is to manage that and choose our battles, I guess. It's kind of like raising a toddler. Choose your battles. Absolutely.
So finally, I just sort of wanted to we've spent a lot of time looking back or around in this episode, but I wonder if we could flip that and look into the future, because it strikes me that you're almost at a bit of a, you've come full circle or 180. I don't know which of which kind of rotation we're on, where the start of Kevin & Co is taking a deep breath and a big bet on Taskmaster, and now you've got Spelling Bee, which was a hit very much by local standards now, but also has the clear potential to become an exportable format in a way that relatively few local productions do. I had Guy Mont, whose show, whose idea it kind of grew out of on this podcast recently, and he, he's not shy about admitting that it does have that kind of level of ambition associated with it. What is next for Kevin and Co? Do you perceive the company as having the ability to take something like Spelling Bee or other shows or formats and start to kind of move out more?
100%. That's the goal for us. Is we want to put New Zealand comedians on the map, whether that's unscripted or unscripted, and we as a business want to be able to rely on other ways to finance shows. We want complex finance plans. That's my goal in life.
I love that.
Because what that does is it allows us to move into that next tier, allowing other production companies to come in and play and have fun, and learn and grow. And if we can be part of that as well and take on some of the small, James Mustapic, we're doing a show with him at the moment, and it's great that we're able to still do those shows, but then we can take something like Gaimont and try and take it to the world. Creamery has been a really great example for us, even though it's a co-pro with Flat 3. It's a good example of working directly with Hulu. There's interest in the format. We're actively working in that space. Cam spent some time at MIPCOM last year. He's just been in Australia this week. So we're really trying to focus on the international side of our business. And ultimately what that's going to mean is that we can then fund our development and we can make more shows. So it's kind of, it all goes back into the local market. The better you do internationally, I think, because that's how you have something like, SPP is so successful because they're able to fund development. And that's why they're so great at what they do, because they're able to keep the train going and keep that short and cheap model, which upskills the industry. It's good for everybody, And so I think if we can get bigger, it's good for us, obviously, of course, but it is good for the industry because it means we can actually take those bets, and we can take a punt on things, which at the moment we can only take a few bets because, there's only so much money and you want to spend most of it on screen.
Well, honestly, it's such an impressive thing that you've accomplished over the last, 5-7 years or so, and I think it very much looks like that, as tall as that order is, that you're well placed to achieve it. So thanks so much for coming on The Fold today and sharing your story, Bronwynn.
No problem. Thank you for having me. I hope that was helpful and useful, and I hope everyone enjoyed listening to me rant about various things.
In particular Harry's contribution. Let's not underplay that.
Yeah. She's very chatty like her mum.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spin-off Podcast Network.